The email wasn't even addressed to me properly. Just a generic family update subject line, sent from an account I didn't recognize immediately. Probably one Chloe created just for this purpose, detached and anonymous. It was sandwiched between a coupon offer for cat food I don't need, since Jasper passed last spring, and a final demand notice for council tax I'd already paid. Fitting, really. An insult tucked away amongst the mundane and the irritating. Inside, a brightly formatted invitation graphic, swirls of gold, tasteful calligraphy, announced the upcoming nuptials of Chloe Elizabeth Marston and Richard Alastair Finch. My daughter, my only child, getting married. And the email body beneath the pretty picture, a short, brutally cheerful paragraph about how, due to venue constraints and their desire for an intimate gathering, they were keeping the guest list very small. It hoped everyone would understand. There was no personal note. No, Mum, I'm so sorry, but no phone call, just this, an electronic dismissal, venue constraints. The irony was a physical blow, winding me before the full scope of the betrayal settled in my gut, cold and heavy as lead. Intimate. Apparently, intimate didn't include the woman who'd held her hand through night terrors, scraped knees, teenage heartbreaks. The woman who'd worked 2 jobs after Thomas left to make sure she had the violin lessons she begged for, the deposit for her first flat, the endless, thankless, invisible scaffolding that holds a child up until they decide they can fly solo. Or, in Chloe's case, until they decide your ballast they need to cut loose. I sat there staring at the screen, the cheerful gold script blurring through the sudden hot sting of tears. Richard Finch. I barely knew him, met him twice. He seemed polished. Expensive suit, easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, a handshake like a closing vault door. He worked with Thomas, my ex-husband. Of course he did. Thomas, who'd always found me lacking, who traded me in for a younger, sleeker model years ago. The kind of woman who probably never had chipped nail polish or worried about stretching the grocery budget. Thomas, who'd undoubtedly whispered poison in Chloe's ear for years, painting me as dowdy, embarrassing, perpetually stuck in the past he was so keen to escape. He'd be there, of course. Front row, beaming, playing the proud father role he'd only ever intermittently remembered to perform. His new wife, Cynthia, would be beside him, dripping discreet diamonds, her smile radiating smug victory. They wouldn't face venue constraints. Their intimacy was the acceptable kind. Mine apparently was inconvenient. A reminder of simpler times, a reminder of struggle, a reminder perhaps that Chloe hadn't always been destined for the smooth, expensive life Richard and Thomas represented. Did she think I'd make a scene? Turn up in my 10-year-old occasion dress and embarrass her in front of the Finches and their undoubtedly affluent friends? Was I suddenly relegated to the category of problem relative one hides away? The thought was a fresh stab of pain. All those years of trying to be enough to compensate for Thomas's absence, his casual cruelty, his financial games, all for this. To be digitally disowned via bulk email. I closed the laptop, the click echoing in the sudden, oppressive silence of my small living room. Jasper's favorite spot on the sofa seemed achingly empty. The house felt hollow, too big for one person suddenly stripped of her most fundamental role. Mother of the bride. A role I'd daydreamed about, admittedly with a nod of anxiety knowing Chloe, knowing Thomas, but still. I'd pictured the hat shopping, the shared nerves, the quiet moment before she walked down the aisle, a lifetime of love unspoken in a single glance. Clichés maybe, but they were my clichés, hopes I'd nurtured despite everything. Now they lay shattered around my feet like cheap glass. Venue constraints. The phrase snagged in my mind, a tiny, persistent burr. It sounded like something Richard or perhaps Cynthia would come up with. Corporate, impersonal, designed to deflect. What venue could be so incredibly small, yet presumably grand enough for the Finches and Thomas's aspirations? Chloe had always dreamed big, fantastical fairytale big. I remembered her childhood drawings, castles, ballrooms, gardens overflowing with impossible flowers. As she got older, the dreams just got glossier, fueled by magazines, and later, the lifestyle Thomas curated for her on his Access weekends. Where could they possibly be holding this intimate affair? A sudden, sharp curiosity pierced through the fog of hurt. Not because I wanted to crash it, not then, but because the excuse felt so flimsy, so deliberately insulting. I needed to know the name of the place that had rendered me irrelevant. It felt important somehow, a piece of a puzzle I didn't yet understand. The hurt wasn't fading, but something else was stirring underneath it. A flicker of defiance. A cold, clear anger starting to replace the hot tears. They thought they could erase me with an email. They thought I would just disappear quietly. Perhaps they didn't know me as well as they thought they did. Perhaps Thomas had conveniently forgotten the steel that had kept me standing after he walked out. Perhaps Chloe had never seen it at all. I spent the next few days in a daze, moving through the motions of my quiet life. Watering the plants, sorting through Jasper's old things, a task I'd been avoiding, now suddenly manageable in the face of a larger grief. Fielding calls from my sister Helen, carefully skirting around the topic of Chloe. Helen meant well, but her pity felt like sandpaper on raw skin. I couldn't bear to tell her the full extent of the humiliation. Not yet. The non-invitation festered inside me, a toxic bloom. I replayed conversations with Chloe over the past few months, searching for clues I'd missed. Her increasing distance, the vague answers about wedding plans, the way she'd steered conversations towards Richard's family, his job, their aspirational future. Had she mentioned a venue? Snippets floated back disconnected. Something about the countryside, old stone, beautiful gardens. She'd been excited, bubbly, but evasive when I asked for details. "It's a surprise, Mum," she'd laughed, a sound that now seemed brittle and false. "We want everything to be perfect." Perfect, meaning without me. I finally did what I knew I had to do. I replied to the generic email address, keeping my tone carefully neutral, betraying none of the maelstrom inside. "Thank you for the update, Chloe. Wishing you and Richard all the very best on your special day. I hope it's everything you dream of." Short, polite, a masterpiece of contained heartbreak. I didn't ask why. I didn't plead or demand. Dignity, I told myself, was the only thing they couldn't take from me. If she wanted to cut me out, I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me bleed. Let her wonder. Let Thomas and Cynthia bask in their sterile victory. My absence would be my statement, or so I thought. The reply came surprisingly quickly, this time just from Chloe. The anonymous shield dropped. "Thanks, Mum, means a lot." That was it. Means a lot. The casual cruelty of it, the utter lack of awareness, or perhaps the deliberate performance of it, knocked the air out of me again. It wasn't enough to exclude me, she needed my blessing too, my passive acceptance of my own erasure. The anger flared again, hotter this time, burning away the last vestiges of passive sorrow. This wasn't just about being excluded from a party. This was about being devalued, discarded, deemed unworthy by my own child, aided and abetted by the man who had started the process years ago. This was the culmination of a lifetime of subtle dismissals, of being told in ways big and small that I wasn't sophisticated enough, wealthy enough, good enough. And the excuse, the venue. It still bothered me. I found myself idly searching online, typing in phrases Chloe might have used. Luxury wedding venue, countryside estate, historic manor wedding. Pages scrolled by, filled with glossy photos of immaculate lawns and chandelier-lit ballrooms. Then a name caught my eye, mentioned on a wedding blog discussing exclusive, high-end locations not far from the city. Oakhaven Manor. The pictures showed old, honey-colored stone, sprawling gardens cascading down to a shimmering lake, elegant interiors with period features. It looked exactly like the sort of place Chloe would fall in love with, the kind of place Richard's family would approve of, the kind of place Thomas would boast about. It also looked familiar. A flicker of memory, distant and hazy. Had Thomas mentioned it once years ago in a different context? Something about a failed investment, a place he'd considered buying but decided against? Or was I imagining things? I clicked through the venue's website. It was stunning. Exclusive, certainly. Expensive, undoubtedly, but small. The website boasted capacity for 200 guests seated, more for a standing reception. Venue constraints was an outright lie. A deliberate, calculated lie designed to inflict maximum hurt while maintaining a veneer of polite regret. They hadn't just excluded me, they had lied to my face, assuming I was too stupid or too cowed to question it. That realization was the final catalyst. The quiet strength Helen sometimes complimented, the resilience I'd honed raising Chloe alone after Thomas left, it coalesced into something sharp and focused. They thought I was negligible? Fine. They wanted Oakhaven Manor for their perfect, exclusive wedding? Fine, let them have it, but they wouldn't be having it on their terms, not entirely. A wild, audacious idea began to form, taking root in the scorched earth of my grief. It was insane. It was probably impossible. But the thought of Chloe's face, of Thomas's smug certainty shattering, it was a spark in the darkness. Oakhaven Manor. It was a beautiful name, it had potential. The idea lodged itself firmly in my mind, Oakhaven Manor. Not just the name, but the place itself. The lie about venue constraints echoed, mocking me. If they wanted exclusivity, if they wanted this perfect backdrop for their perfect life, a life that pointedly didn't include me, what if the backdrop itself belonged to the person they'd tried to erase? It started as a fantasy, a bitter daydream during sleepless nights. Me somehow sweeping in, revealing myself not as the cast-off mother, but as the silent power behind the scenes. But fantasies are flimsy things. Reality requires action, and action requires resources I wasn't sure I possessed. Thomas had always handled the finances when we were married, and after the divorce he'd fought tooth and nail over every penny, leaving me with the house mortgaged to the hilt, and barely enough child support to cover basics, let alone luxuries. He'd always insinuated I was hopeless with money, incapable of managing anything substantial. Maybe I'd started to believe him, yet I had worked, tirelessly. First, the part-time admin job while Chloe was small, then full-time, then evenings and weekends waitressing when the mortgage rates climbed. I'd been frugal, careful. I'd squirreled away small amounts, invested modestly on the advice of a kind old bank manager years ago. And then there was Mum and Dad's legacy. Not a fortune, not by Thomas's standards, but they'd been thrifty Yorkshire folk. They left me their small house, which I'd rented out, the income a quiet safety net I never touched, never mentioned to Chloe or Thomas. It was my independence fund, a bulwark against the precariousness Thomas had thrust upon me. Could it be enough? Was Oakhaven Manor even remotely within reach? Driven by a need I couldn't quite articulate, partly vengeance, partly a desperate need to reclaim some sense of agency, I started digging. Discreetly, obsessively. Oakhaven Manor wasn't owned by a large corporation, but by an elderly couple, the Ashtons, who'd lovingly restored it over decades but were now looking to retire. Local whispers, gleaned from carefully worded online searches and obscure property forums, suggested they were finding the upkeep increasingly difficult. There were hints of financial strain, a desire for a quick, quiet sale to someone who would respect the manor's heritage. No splashy headlines, no for sale board out front. They wanted discretion. My heart beat faster. This wasn't just a fantasy anymore, it felt possible. Aligned. Like the universe for once might be tilting slightly in my favor. The asking price, when I finally unearthed a rumor of it through a commercial property grapevine, was staggering. Far more than my savings and the value of my parents' house combined. Discouragement washed over me, cold and familiar. Of course it was impossible. Thomas was right. I was aiming too high, dreaming beyond my station. Who was I, a middle-aged woman working a steady but unremarkable office job, to think I could buy a prestigious country manor? I almost gave up. Almost retreated back into the quiet resignation that felt safer, more familiar. But then I pictured Chloe's dismissive email. Thomas's smug face at the wedding. Cynthia's pitying glances. The lie, venue constraints. The anger returned, low and simmering, fueling a stubbornness I'd forgotten I possessed. There had to be a way. I contacted a specialist financial advisor, not my usual high street bank, but someone recommended for complex private acquisitions. Mr. Davies was calm, methodical, reassuringly unimpressed by the scale of my ambition. He listened patiently as I haltingly explained my situation, omitting the emotional backstory, focusing only on the potential investment. We went through my assets meticulously. My house, my parents' property, the small investment portfolio, my modest pension fund. He explored leveraging options, bridging loans, the possibility of finding silent partners, though the thought of involving anyone else felt like diluting the purpose. It had to be mine. Alone. Mr. Davies pointed out the manor's potential as a thriving business, its established reputation, its booking calendar, which I noted with grim satisfaction included a certain Finch Marston wedding in 3 months' time. If managed well, it wasn't just an expense, it was an income-generating asset. The numbers were still terrifying, pushing me to the absolute edge of my resources, requiring me to liquidate almost everything, take on significant debt. It was an all-or-nothing gamble. Failure would mean not just financial ruin, but the confirmation of every doubt Thomas had ever planted in my head. But success would mean what? Revenge, vindication, or simply finally owning something undeniably valuable, something no one could dismiss or take away. Something that proved I was valuable. The risk felt enormous, terrifying, but the thought of doing nothing, of simply accepting Chloe's rejection and fading into the background felt worse. It felt like a betrayal of myself. After weeks of agonizing deliberation, sleepless nights spent staring at spreadsheets that swam before my eyes, I made the call. Mr. Davies, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Let's proceed. Let's make an offer. The negotiation process was nerve-wracking, conducted in absolute secrecy. Mr. Davies handled the direct communication with the Ashtons' representatives, shielding my identity. They were, as rumored, keen for a swift, discreet sale to the right buyer. My offer, leveraged to the hilt but fair, and accompanied by a personal letter ghostwritten by Mr. Davies' team, but infused with my genuine respect for the manor and commitment to its future, was accepted. The speed of it was dizzying. Contracts were drawn up, finances frantically rearranged, my parents' house sold in a whirlwind private transaction. My own home was remortgaged up to its eyeballs. Every penny I had, every safety net I'd ever built was funneled into this single monumental gamble. There were moments I felt physically sick with fear. What if the business faltered? What if Thomas found out and tried to interfere? What if Chloe? No, I couldn't think about Chloe's reaction yet. One step at a time. Focus on the logistics. The day the sale completed, I drove out to Oakhaven Manor alone. It wasn't handover day yet, the Ashtons were staying on for a transition period, but I parked on the lane outside, hidden by the ancient oak trees that gave the place its name, and just looked. The late afternoon sun warmed the honeystone, turning the windows to gold. Smoke curled from a chimney. It looked peaceful, stately, impossibly beautiful, and it was mine. The terror hadn't vanished, but beneath it, something else was solidifying, a sense of quiet, fierce ownership. A feeling I hadn't realized I'd been craving my whole life. This wasn't just about Chloe's wedding anymore. This was about me, my future, my resilience made manifest in stone and mortar and sprawling, beautiful gardens. Let them have their intimate wedding. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The transition period was a blur of clandestine meetings and careful planning. I met the Ashtons properly, a kind, slightly frail couple genuinely relieved to be passing their beloved home into appreciative hands. They knew me only as Ms. Eleanor Vance, a private investor. They had no inkling of my connection to an upcoming wedding booking. My secrecy was absolute. I couldn't risk word getting back to Chloe or Thomas before the day. The element of surprise was crucial, not just for the dramatic impact, but for my own emotional self-preservation. If they knew beforehand, they might cancel, move the wedding, robbing me of the chance to face them on my own terms in my own territory. Mr. Davies handled the business side, ensuring the existing management structure remained largely in place for continuity. The venue manager, Sarah Carmichael, was sharp, efficient, and fiercely loyal to the manor. I met with her several times, ostensibly as a representative of the new owner, learning the operational details, the staffing rotas, the supplier contracts. I needed to understand the business I now owned, not just the building. Sarah was initially wary, protective of the Ashtons and her team, but my genuine interest in maintaining the manor's standards and perhaps my quiet determination seemed to win her over. She spoke about upcoming events, including the Finch-Marston wedding. Bit of a demanding bride, this one, she commented wryly during one meeting, shuffling through planning documents. And the father of the bride's new wife seems to think she's running the show. Lots of last-minute changes, very specific ideas about seating arrangements. My heart gave a painful thud. Cynthia, of course. Oh, I kept my voice level, betraying nothing. Demanding how? Sarah sighed. Want specific champagne only stocked by one supplier who charges a fortune, insisting on replanting a section of the rose garden with white blooms only because yellow is so terribly common, and constantly calling to check details we confirmed weeks ago. Poor Chloe, the bride, seems caught in the middle. Seems nice enough, just overwhelmed, or maybe just easily led. Easily led. That sounded like my Chloe. Eager to please, especially those she perceived as having higher status. Eager to fit into the new, glossy world Thomas and Cynthia represented. It hurt to hear it confirmed by a stranger, but it also solidified my resolve. Chloe wasn't entirely the villain in this, perhaps. She was a product of her father's manipulation and her own insecurities I now realized I'd failed to protect her from. But that didn't excuse the cruelty of her actions. It didn't absolve her. The wedding date loomed closer, a fixed point on the horizon. 2 months became 1 month, then weeks, then days. My anxiety levels ratcheted up. Doubts gnawed at me. Was this whole thing a terrible mistake? Was I motivated by spite? Would seeing Chloe, even in these circumstances, break my heart all over again? I spent hours walking the grounds of Oak Haven in the evenings after the staff had gone home, familiarizing myself with every pathway, every ancient tree, every hidden corner. The place began to feel like an extension of myself, solid, weathered, beautiful in its imperfections. It calmed me, centered me. This was real. Whatever happened on the day, this achievement was real. I owned Oak Haven Manor. Eleanor Vance, no, Eleanor Marston, the name I'd reclaimed after the divorce, the name Chloe now shared but seemed ashamed of, was the owner. I decided I wouldn't hide in an office on the day. That felt cowardly, anticlimactic. I would be present. Visible. Not interfering, not causing a scene, but simply there, occupying my space. Letting the reality dawn on them slowly, undeniably. Sarah Carmichael knew the new owner, Ms. Vance, would be on site periodically, checking on operations. She didn't need to know the significance of this particular Saturday. I planned my outfit carefully. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed mother of the bride. Just a simple, elegant dark blue trouser suit. Professional, understated, authoritative. The kind of outfit the owner of a prestigious venue might wear while overseeing a major event. Jewelry would be minimal, just my own mother's simple gold locket tucked beneath the blouse. A private reminder of where my strength ultimately came from. The night before the wedding, sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying scenarios, Chloe's face when she saw me, Thomas's inevitable bluster, Cynthia's perfectly constructed composure cracking. Would there be shouting, tears? Would they demand I leave? The irony wasn't lost on me. They couldn't demand I leave my own property. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. But power wasn't the point. Or was it? Maybe it was about reclaiming the power that had been systematically stripped from me over years of being Thomas's less-than-perfect wife, and then Chloe's embarrassing mother. Maybe it was about showing them and myself that I was not defined by their judgment. I thought about calling Chloe one last time, extending an olive branch, trying to understand. But what could I say? Darling, I know you didn't invite me, but I accidentally bought your wedding venue. It sounded ludicrous. and pointless. The time for talking was long past. Actions had been taken, lines drawn. The email, the lie about venue constraints, those were their actions. Buying Oakhaven Manor was mine. Tomorrow would reveal the consequences. As dawn broke, painting the sky in pale, watery colors, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a sense of inevitability, almost peace. I had done everything I could. I had taken control of the narrative in the only way left open to me. Now all that remained was to see it through. I showered, dressed carefully, drank a cup of strong tea, avoiding my reflection in the mirror. It wasn't about how I looked. It was about how I felt. Grounded, resolute, ready. I drove to Oakhaven Manor, arriving hours before the first guests were due, watching the familiar gates swing open to admit me. My property, my terms. The manor was already buzzing with controlled energy. Florists were adding final touches to extravagant arrangements, predominantly white, I noted with a tight smile. Caterers bustled in the kitchens, the scent of expensive canapés mingling with beeswax polish. Sarah Carmichael moved through the chaos with calm authority, clipboard in hand. She greeted me with a professional nod. Ms. Vance, everything's running smoothly. The Finch Marston party are due to arrive shortly for pre-ceremony photos. Thank you, Sarah, I replied, my voice even. I'll just be observing today, ensuring everything meets our standards for such an important event. She smiled faintly. I think you'll find everything more than meets their standards, especially Madame Cynthia's. We shared a brief, knowing look. It felt good, that small moment of connection with someone who understood the dynamics, even if she didn't know the half of it. I spent the next hour walking the main reception rooms, checking details with the staff, adjusting a slightly crooked picture frame, speaking quietly with the head waiter about the champagne chilling. Yes, the specific overpriced brand Cynthia had demanded. I wasn't hiding, but I wasn't seeking attention either. I simply was. Present. Part of the fabric of the place. Then, through the tall windows overlooking the sweeping gravel drive, I saw them arrive. Not in understated elegance, but in a gleaming convoy of luxury cars. Thomas emerged first, looking sleek and self-satisfied in his morning suit, Cynthia clinging possessively to his arm, her outfit a symphony in pale, expensive beige. She scanned the manor facade with an air of critical approval, as if she personally owned it. Richard Finch got out next, looking slightly nervous but trying to project easy confidence. And then, Chloe. My breath caught. She stepped out of the car, a vision in white lace, her hair swept up, pearls gleaming at her throat. For a moment she was just my daughter, beautiful and radiant on her wedding day, and a wave of pure, uncomplicated maternal love washed over me, so strong it threatened to buckle my knees. The grief of my exclusion felt suddenly overwhelmingly sharp. This was the moment I was supposed to be part of, fussing with her veil, whispering words of encouragement, sharing her joy. Instead, I stood unseen, watching from behind a window like a ghost at the feast. But the moment passed as quickly as it came. Chloe looked around, not with wonder, but with a kind of anxious assessment, her eyes flicking towards Cynthia then Thomas, seeking their approval. Her smile seemed tight, practiced. She adjusted her veil, her movements stiff. The vulnerability I glimpsed was quickly masked by a brittle brightness. This wasn't the carefree, laughing girl I remembered. This was someone performing a role, desperate to get it right according to someone else's script. The group swept into the entrance hall, their voices echoing in the vaulted space. Thomas was booming about the splendid architecture, clearly taking credit for choosing such a fine venue. Cynthia was already issuing instructions to a hovering assistant about where the gift table should really go. Chloe trailed slightly behind, Richard's hand resting proprietorially on the small of her back. They hadn't seen me yet. I stayed where I was, near the doorway to the main drawing room, partially obscured by a large floral display, white roses naturally. I watched them interact with Sarah Carmichael, who greeted them politely. Welcome to Oakhaven Manor, Mr. Marston. Cynthia, Chloe, Richard, everything is prepared for you. Cynthia barely acknowledged her, already pointing out a perceived speck of dust on a mahogany table. Thomas clapped Richard on the back. Magnificent place, eh, Richard? Told you I had an eye for quality. Chloe just nodded, her gaze darting around nervously. Did she sense something, or was it just pre-wedding jitters amplified by the formidable personalities surrounding her? I needed to make my presence known. Not dramatically, not yet. Just establish my position. Taking a steadying breath, I stepped out from behind the flowers. I walked calmly towards the group, focusing on Sarah. Sarah is the string quartet in place by the fountain. The bride requested Pachelbel's canon as guests arrive, I believe. My voice was quiet but clear, carrying in the high-ceilinged hall. All conversation stopped. 4 heads swiveled towards me. Chloe's eyes widened first, a flicker of disbelief, then confusion. Richard looked blank, probably assuming I was a senior staff member. Cynthia's perfectly plucked eyebrows drew together in a frown of faint annoyance, as if I were an unfamiliar piece of furniture obstructing her view. Thomas froze. His jovial expression dissolved, replaced by a look of utter slack-jawed shock. He knew me. Instantly, even in the smart suit, even standing there calmly discussing musical arrangements. He knew me. And he knew I shouldn't be there. Sarah, to her credit, didn't miss a beat. Yes, Ms. Vance, they're just tuning up now. Everything is precisely as requested. Ms. Vance, the name hung in the air. Chloe's confusion deepened. She looked from me to Thomas, then back to me, a question forming on her lips. Cynthia recovered first, her voice sharp with irritation. And who are you? She directed at me, her tone implying I was interrupting something far more important. I met her gaze directly, coolly. I'm Alina Vance, I said, keeping my voice level. I'm the owner of Oakhaven Manor. I trust everything is to your satisfaction. The silence that followed was profound. You could have heard a petal drop from Cynthia's aggressively white roses. Chloe made a small choking sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Richard's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing as he finally processed the name Sarah had used, connecting it with the woman standing before him. Cynthia's perfectly made-up face went rigid, her eyes flicking towards Thomas with furious incomprehension. But it was Thomas's reaction that was most revealing. The shock morphed into a dark, mottled flush creeping up his neck. His eyes, usually full of calculated charm or cold dismissal, now held a mixture of disbelief, fury, and something else, something that looked disconcertingly like fear. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, speechless. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had imploded. Chloe found her voice first, a strangled whisper. Mum, what are you doing here? Who's Ms. Vance? Her eyes darted between me and Thomas, desperately seeking an explanation that made sense within her carefully constructed world. I told you, I said, my voice still quiet, refusing to rise to the drama they radiated. I'm Alina Vance, I own this property, I bought it several weeks ago. Cynthia let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. That's ridiculous. Thomas, what is she talking about? This is absurd. She rounded on me, regaining her composure through sheer force of will, her voice dripping condescension. Look, whoever you are, this is my stepdaughter's wedding day. We haven't hired any new consultants. Sarah, she snapped, turning to the manager, please deal with this person. Sarah stood her ground, her expression professionally neutral but her eyes holding a glint of something else. Respect, amusement? Cynthia, she said calmly, Ms. Vance is the new owner of Oakhaven Manor. The sale was completed last month. She has been overseeing operations during the transition. The confirmation, delivered so matter-of-factly by a trusted member of the venue staff, seemed to finally break through their denial. Richard looked pale, his eyes fixed on me with dawning horror. Chloe swayed slightly, clutching his arm. Bought it? You bought Oakhaven? She stammered, the words barely audible. How? The question hung in the air, laced with disbelief and an undercurrent of accusation. How could I, her supposedly embarrassing, financially inept mother, possibly afford a place like this? The implication was clear. Thomas finally spoke, his voice rough. Alina, what the hell is this? What game are you playing? His face was thunderous, the mask of geniality completely gone, revealing the bully beneath. It's no game, Thomas, I replied, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. It's a business decision, a sound investment. Oakhaven was for sale, discreetly. I made an offer, it was accepted. I paused, letting the simple facts sink in. I understand my daughter is getting married here today, quite the coincidence. The coincidence part felt necessary. Admitting I'd bought it because of the wedding, because of the snub, would give them ammunition, paint me as vindictive, crazy. Let them think it was sheer, improbable chance. It was more humiliating for them that way, more elegant. Coincidence? Chloe whispered, her face ashen. Tears welled in her eyes, but whether from shock, humiliation, or some dawning guilt, I couldn't tell. Mum, you own the place, the place we? She couldn't finish the sentence. The irony was choking her. Her dream venue, the symbol of her elevated new life, belonged to the mother she deemed unworthy to attend. Cynthia, however, was regrouping. Her mind, sharp and accustomed to damage control, was already working. Well, she said, forcing a brittle smile, her eyes like chips of ice. This is certainly unexpected, Alina. She used my first name with deliberate, dismissive familiarity. How enterprising of you. But surely you understand that your presence here today under these circumstances is inappropriate. Perhaps you could oversee your business from your office? She waved a dismissive hand towards a corridor. This is a private family event. The sheer audacity of it, trying to banish me from my own property, almost made me laugh. Actually, Cynthia, I said, my voice dangerously soft, as the owner, I make it my business to ensure all high-profile events run perfectly, especially weddings. So many things can go wrong, wouldn't you agree? Catering issues, power fluctuations, venue constraints. I let the last words hang in the air, weighted with meaning. Chloe flinched as if struck. Thomas's flush deepened. My team and I continued, gesturing briefly towards Sarah, who maintained her perfect professional mask, are here to ensure Chloe and Richard have a seamless, wonderful day. You needn't worry about a thing. Now I believe you have photographs scheduled in the rose garden. The light is perfect this time of morning. I gave them a polite, almost gentle smile, the kind one might offer slightly difficult but important clients. The message was clear: I wasn't leaving. I was in charge. And I knew exactly why I hadn't been invited. The power had not just shifted, it was now entirely, undeniably mine. They were guests on my property, their perfect day depended on my goodwill. The silence stretched again, thick with unspoken fury, humiliation, and confusion. They looked at each other, trapped. Leaving wasn't an option. Where would they go? Continuing under my watchful, knowing gaze seemed intolerable. Chloe finally broke, burying her face in Richard's shoulder, her elaborate updo trembling. Richard looked helplessly from Chloe to Thomas, then to me, his expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. Thomas stared at me, his eyes promising retribution, but for now he was neutered, silenced by the sheer, unexpected reversal of fortune. Checkmate. They retreated eventually, not towards the rose garden, but towards a private suite that had been allocated for the bridal party's preparations. A strategic withdrawal to regroup, to process the shock, to decide how to salvage the day or at least their pride. Chloe didn't look back. Thomas shot me one last venomous glare before turning sharply on his heel, Cynthia following rigidly, her back radiating disapproval. Richard hesitated for a fraction of a second, his gaze meeting mine with a flicker of something unreadable: anger, curiosity, resignation, before he guided Chloe away. The grand entrance hall felt suddenly quiet again, the distant strains of Pachelbel's cannon drifting in from the garden, a soundtrack to a drama that had just played its stunning first act. Sarah Carmichael let out a slow breath beside me. "Well," she murmured, her professional mask finally slipping into a look of wry astonishment. "That was something." I managed a small smile, though my insides were churning. The confrontation had been draining, the adrenaline leaving me shaky. "Just ensuring the clients feel attended to, Sarah." "I imagine they feel thoroughly attended to," she replied dryly. "What happens now, Ms. Vance?" It was a fair question. What did happen now? I hadn't planned beyond this initial reveal. I hadn't thought about how I would navigate the rest of the day, watching my daughter marry a man I barely knew, surrounded by people who had deliberately wounded me, all while playing the role of the gracious, professional venue owner. "Now," I said, squaring my shoulders, forcing a sense of calm I didn't entirely feel, "now we ensure the wedding proceeds flawlessly. We do our jobs. Oakhaven Manor has a reputation to uphold." Sarah nodded, her expression clearing, becoming all business again. "Of course. Staff briefing in 5, excellent." As Sarah walked away, I allowed myself a moment, leaning lightly against a cool marble pillar. The emotional cost of the confrontation hit me. Seeing Chloe's face crumble, the raw pain mixed with confusion, it wasn't the triumphant moment my vengeful fantasies had pictured. It was just sad. Deeply, profoundly sad. Had I done the right thing? Buying the manor felt right, reclaiming my agency felt right. But orchestrating this reveal, inflicting this level of shock and humiliation on Chloe's wedding day, was it too much? Was it cruel? Then I remembered the cold, dismissive email. The calculated lie. The years of subtle undermining by Thomas, aided by Cynthia's snobbery. The way Chloe had so readily absorbed their narrative, casting me aside like an embarrassing old coat. No, this wasn't cruelty. It was consequences. A necessary rebalancing of scales that had been unfairly weighted against me for far too long. I wouldn't interfere further. I wouldn't make snide remarks or gloat. My power lay in my presence, my ownership, my quiet control over the environment they had chosen as their stage. I would simply be Alina Vance, owner of Oakhaven Manor, ensuring her clients had a memorable day. The irony would be my silent commentary. Guests began to arrive, murmuring appreciation for the manor's beauty, unaware of the tempest that had just occurred within its walls. I moved among them discreetly, exchanging pleasantries, accepting compliments on my beautiful venue with a gracious nod. I saw some familiar faces, distant relatives of Thomas, old neighbors who had likely heard his version of our divorce. They looked surprised to see me, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awkwardness as they registered my calm presence, my professional demeanor. No one dared approach me directly about the situation. My ownership, though perhaps not yet widely understood, conferred a certain untouchability. The ceremony took place outdoors by the lake under a flower-laden archway, white of course. I watched from a distance, standing near the back, partially concealed by an ancient willow tree. Chloe looked beautiful but fragile, her smile trembling as she walked down the aisle on Thomas's arm. Thomas looked stiff, his face a mask of forced geniality for the benefit of the guests, but his eyes kept darting around, searching for me, a flicker of anxiety marring his usual smugness. Richard waited at the altar, looking composed but strained. During the vows, Chloe's voice cracked. Richard's hand tightened on hers. Were they tears of joy or something else? Regret? Humiliation? From my vantage point, I couldn't tell. I felt a strange mix of detachment and lingering pain. This should have been my moment too, watching my daughter embark on a new life. Instead, I was an outsider at my own child's wedding, a wedding happening in my own house. The bitter sweetness of it was a physical ache in my chest. Yet beneath the ache, there was also a sense of release. Seeing them all together, the brittle perfection, the underlying tensions, the performance of it all, I realized I didn't belong there. Not because they excluded me, but because I no longer fit into their world of surfaces and pretensions. My world, the one I was building here at Oak Haven, felt more real, more substantial. Even with the financial risks, even with the emotional fallout, it felt like mine. As they were pronounced husband and wife, a polite ripple of applause went through the guests. Thomas hugged Chloe tightly, a possessive gesture before pointedly shaking Richard's hand. Cynthia dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, a perfect picture of maternal sentimentality. I turned away before the recessional began, melting back towards the main house. Let them have their photographs, their champagne, their forced celebrations. I had work to do, my work. The reception unfolded in the Manor's grand ballroom. Chandeliers glittered, champagne flowed, the expensive kind, and the string quartet played Vivaldi. From the discreet gallery overlooking the room, intended for musicians or observers, I watched the proceedings. I saw Thomas holding court, laughing too loudly, accepting congratulations as if he'd orchestrated the entire affair. I saw Cynthia moving through the crowd, radiating condescending charm, occasionally shooting sharp glances towards the gallery, as if sensing my presence. Richard danced the first dance with Chloe, holding her stiffly, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. They looked like mannequins posed in a shop window display of marital bliss. Chloe seemed to be going through the motions, her earlier radiance completely extinguished, replaced by a pale, strained obedience. She caught my eye once, her gaze flickering up towards the gallery. There was a complex mix of emotions in that fleeting look, hurt, anger, perhaps a plea for understanding. Before she quickly looked away, turning back to her new husband. I didn't approach them, I didn't seek out confrontations. My mere presence, my ownership was enough. The power dynamic had been fundamentally altered, and they knew it. The tension was palpable beneath the veneer of celebration. Guests murmured, sensing something amiss but unable to pinpoint it. There were awkward silences, forced laughs, conversations that died down whenever someone thought I might be within earshot. The carefully crafted illusion of their perfect day had a crack running right through it, and the crack was me. During the speeches, Thomas stood up, glass in hand, beaming magnanimously. He spoke glowingly of Richard, of the bright future ahead for the happy couple, of his own pride in his daughter. He thanked the Finches for welcoming Chloe into their family. He even managed a brief, generic thank you to everyone who made this day possible, carefully avoiding any mention of the venue's ownership or management. It was a masterclass in evasion, in glossing over the uncomfortable reality. He didn't mention me, of course. It was as if I didn't exist, had never existed. Years ago, that omission would have devastated me. Now, listening from the shadows of the gallery, I felt nothing. A strange, cold emptiness where the hurt used to be. His words, his approval, his acknowledgement, they no longer held any power over me. He was just a man playing a part, desperately trying to maintain control of a narrative that had slipped from his grasp. Richard's speech was short, stumbling, full of platitudes about Chloe being his soulmate and thanking Oak Haven Manor for its impeccable service. He didn't look towards the gallery. Chloe didn't give a speech. She sat beside Richard, picking at her food, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth. Later, I saw Cynthia approach Sarah Carmichael, her voice a low, urgent hiss. I couldn't hear the words, but Sarah's calm, firm headshake and Cynthia's subsequent tightened lips spoke volumes. Perhaps she was trying to get me removed, still unable to accept the reality of the situation. Perhaps she was complaining about some imagined slight. It didn't matter. Sarah handled it. My staff handled it. The manor ran itself smoothly, efficiently, regardless of the simmering personal dramas. As the evening wore on, the forced gaiety began to fray. Some guests, sensing the underlying tension or perhaps just bored, started to leave early. Thomas looked increasingly agitated, his face flushed with more than just champagne. Cynthia maintained her icy composure, but her smiles were razor-thin. I decided it was time for me to make a quiet exit from the gallery. I'd made my point. I'd reclaimed my space. There was nothing more to be gained by observing their strained festivities. I walked down the back stairs, avoiding the main reception areas, heading towards the staff offices to check out with Sarah. As I passed a side door leading to the terrace, I heard voices. Chloe and Thomas arguing. Can't believe you did this. Chloe's voice was high-pitched, choked with tears. How could you let her humiliate us like this, in front of everyone, Richard's parents? How could I let her? Thomas hissed back, his voice low and furious. How the hell was I supposed to know she'd pull a stunt like this? Buying the bloody venue, where did she even get that kind of money? Did you know about this? No, of course not, I thought she was. Chloe trailed off, unable to voice the assumptions they'd both made about me, poor, pathetic, easily dismissed. She planned it, Dad. She did this deliberately to ruin my wedding. Don't be stupid, Thomas snapped, though he sounded less cert. It must be some kind of fluke. She probably leveraged everything, the stupid woman. She'll be bankrupt in 6 months, but yes, the timing, it's galling. There was a pause, then Chloe spoke again, her voice trembling. What do we do? Everyone knows she's the owner now. Cynthia is furious. Richard is quiet. This is a disaster. We do nothing, Thomas said sharply. We hold our heads high. We ignore her. She wants a reaction. Don't give it to her. She's irrelevant, Chloe. She's always been irrelevant. This changes nothing. Irrelevant. The word hung in the cool night air. Hearing it spoken aloud so callously by my ex-husband to my daughter, it should have hurt. But it didn't, because I knew, standing there in the hallway of the magnificent property I now owned, that it wasn't true. I wasn't irrelevant. I was the ground beneath their feet, and they knew it. Quietly, I turned and walked away, leaving them to their bitterness and recriminations. Their voices faded behind me, swallowed by the grandeur of Oakhaven Manor, my manor. I found Sarah in the main office finalizing paperwork. She looked up as I entered, a question in her eyes. Everything concluding smoothly? I asked, keeping my tone professional. Yes, Ms. Vance, the bar is winding down. Taxis are arriving for the remaining guests. No major incidents despite the unusual circumstances. Good, I said. Thank you, Sarah, for everything. Your professionalism today was exemplary. She inclined her head. We aim to provide the best service regardless. Will you be staying long? No, I said, picking up my handbag. I think my work here is done for today. I walked out through the staff entrance, bypassing the lingering awkwardness of the main hall. The night air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of damp earth and roses. The stars were brilliant, scattered across the dark velvet sky above the silhouetted gables of the manor. My manor. Driving away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. There was nothing back there I needed to see. The anger, the hurt, the need for vindication, they felt distant now, replaced by a profound sense of exhaustion, but also clarity. Thomas's final, dismissive word, irrelevant, echoed, but it had lost its sting. He said it because he needed to believe it, because the alternative that I, the woman he discarded, had somehow outmaneuvered him and achieved something he coveted was unthinkable. Chloe believed it perhaps because acknowledging my relevance now would mean acknowledging the depth of her own cruelty. Their opinions, their validation, which I had craved for so long, simply didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I had done. I had faced betrayal not with tears or pleas, but with quiet strength and decisive action. I had turned their calculated insult, the lie about venue constraints, into the very foundation of my unexpected triumph. I had bought the damn venue. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity focused purely on Oakhaven. There were staff contracts to review, supplier negotiations, marketing strategies to develop, minor renovations I wanted to implement. I threw myself into the work, finding a deep satisfaction in building something tangible, in making decisions, in being the one in charge. It was demanding, challenging, and utterly absorbing. I was no longer just Alina Marston, the quietly competent office worker, the discarded wife, the forgotten mother. I was Ms. Vance, the owner of Oakhaven Manor, a businesswoman carving out a new future for herself. There was no communication from Chloe, Thomas, or Cynthia. Silence. It was a different kind of silence than before, not the silence of ignoring someone deemed insignificant, but the tight-lipped silence of thwarted pride, of unwillingly ceded ground. I didn't reach out either. The ball was in their court, but honestly I didn't care if they ever returned it. My focus had shifted. My life was no longer defined by their acceptance or rejection. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, about a month after the wedding, Sarah buzzed my office intercom. Ms. Vance, there's a young woman here to see you. Ms. Chloe Finch, she doesn't have an appointment, but she seems quite insistent. My heart gave a familiar, painful lurch. Chloe, here. I hesitated for only a moment. Send her in, Sarah. Let's see what this next chapter held. Chloe stood uncertainly in the doorway of my office, elegantly furnished, overlooking the gardens she'd coveted. She looked different. Gone was the brittle brightness of the wedding day. She wore simple jeans and a jumper, her hair was down, and she looked tired, drawn, thinner. There was a vulnerability about her I hadn't seen since she was a teenager. She clutched her handbag like a shield. Mum, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk? Gestured towards the chair opposite my desk. Chloe, please sit down. She perched on the edge of the seat, avoiding my eyes, studying the pattern on the Persian rug instead. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. She started, then stopped, biting her lip. This place it's even more beautiful than I remembered. Thank you, I said quietly. I'm trying to do it justice. More silence. I waited, letting her find the words she'd come to say. Finally, she looked up, her eyes swimming with unshed tears. Mum, I owe you an apology, a huge one. Her voice cracked. The wedding, the invitation, the way I treated you, it was horrible, cruel, there's no excuse. I held her gaze, my expression neutral, waiting. This felt rehearsed, perhaps prompted by Richard, or maybe even a belated prick of her own conscience. Thomas, Dad, and Cynthia, they said they thought you'd be uncomfortable, she faltered, the lie sounding weak even to her own ears. They said it was better this way, cleaner, and Richard's family. They're very formal, and Dad said, he said you wouldn't enjoy it, that you'd feel out of place. And you believed him? I asked, my voice soft but unwavering. She flinched. I wanted to believe him, she admitted, the words tumbling out in a rush. It was easier. Planning the wedding was so stressful, and Cynthia had so many opinions, and Richard just wanted everything to be perfect for his parents. And Dad kept saying how important this marriage was for connections, for business. It felt like I was juggling so much and worrying about how you'd fit in. It felt like one complication too many. I know that sounds awful. It is awful. She looked down at her hands twisting in her lap. I was weak, and I was selfish. I let Dad and Cynthia convince me that you were an inconvenience, someone to be managed or hidden. The lie about venue constraints, I prompted gently. Whose idea was that? She flushed crimson. Cynthia's, she mumbled. She said it sounded kinder than just not inviting you, more practical, less personal. Kinder, the irony was bitter. And you agreed? Chloe nodded miserably. I didn't argue, I just went along with it. I sent that horrible email. I'm so sorry, Mum, so sorry. Tears finally spilled over, tracking paths down her cheeks. She didn't try to wipe them away. Seeing her cry, seeing the genuine remorse in her eyes, chipped away at the protective wall I'd built around my heart. She was still my daughter, flawed and easily influenced, yes, but perhaps not entirely lost. Why are you here now, Chloe? I asked. Is it because I own Oak Haven, because the tables have turned? She shook her head vehemently. No, well, maybe partly. Seeing you there, so capable, so in control, owning this incredible place, it shattered everything Dad had ever said about you. Everything I'd stupidly believed. It made me see how wrong I'd been, how manipulated I'd let myself be. She took a shaky breath. Things with Richard, they're not great. The wedding day was a nightmare after you were revealed. Dad and Cynthia were furious. Richard's parents were asking awkward questions. Richard blamed me for the scene. He said I should have controlled my family. Controlled me. The arrogance was breathtaking, yet predictable. It's been tense ever since, Chloe continued, her voice low. It's like the wedding lifted a veil and I'm seeing everything more clearly. The snobbery, the focus on money and appearances, Dad's constant manipulation. It's not the fairy tale I thought it was. She looked at me then, a direct, pleading gaze. Mum, I know I don't deserve it. I know I hurt you terribly. But can we start again? Can you forgive me? Forgiveness. It wasn't a switch I could just flip. The wounds were deep, the betrayal profound. Owning Oak Haven had given me back my power, my self-respect, but it hadn't magically erased the pain Chloe had inflicted. Chloe, I said slowly, choosing my words carefully. What you did cut deeper than you can probably imagine. It wasn't just about not being invited to a wedding. It felt like my entire life as your mother, everything I sacrificed, everything I tried to be for you was worthless in your eyes. Her face crumpled, fresh tears flowing. I know I was horrible, blind and stupid and cruel. Yes, I agreed quietly. You were. And forgiveness, that's a process, Chloe. It's not just words. It takes time. It takes rebuilding trust. I leaned forward slightly. And it takes you understanding that your father's influence, Cynthia's influence, they are toxic. If you truly want a relationship with me, you need to be strong enough to stand up to them, to set boundaries. You need to decide who you are, independent of their expectations and manipulations. She nodded vigorously, wiping her eyes. I know, I see that now. I've been trying. It's hard. Dad, he doesn't let go easily. But I want to try, Mum. I really do. I miss you. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Saw the young woman struggling beneath the weight of others' expectations, finally beginning to question the path she'd been pushed onto. Saw the flicker of the girl I remembered, the one who used to crawl into my lap after a bad dream. The anger had faded, replaced by a weary sadness, but also a glimmer of hope. Not for a return to how things were, but for something new, something perhaps more honest. All right, Chloe, I said softly. We can try, slowly. One step at a time, but the trust you'll have to earn that back. A watery smile broke through her tears. Thank you, Mum, thank you, I will, I promise I will. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no guarantees. The path ahead for both of us, individually and potentially together, was uncertain. But as Chloe left my office, leaving behind the scent of rain and remorse, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. Oak Haven Manor stood solid around me, a testament to my resilience. My future was my own, and perhaps, just perhaps, there was still room in it for a daughter who was finally ready to find her own way. The power hadn't just been inverted, it had created space for something potentially more authentic to grow. Only time would tell, but for the first time since that cold, impersonal email arrived, I felt a sense of peace. The bittersweet symphony of my life was playing a new, more hopeful chord.